Hello, everybody. This is Joshua Hatton with One Nation Under Whiskey podcast. Now, normally I'm joined by my good friend, my business partner, the dear Jason, Neil, Patrick, Harris, Johnston, Yellen, and oftentimes we're joined by the dear Jessica Rabbit, Guillermo Lomas. However, today is a bit different. Jason, Jess, and I just need a little extra time to work on some enhancements to the podcast, and I've been given the extreme honor to share some of the updates with you about our upcoming season. Season 9, if you can believe it. I really can't believe we're entering season 9. That's just crazy. Anyway, listen, we've been listening closely to your feedback, and we're not only bringing forth new features that you've been asking for, but bringing back some other things, extra, that you've been missing for the past few years. You can look forward to more news, more tasting notes, and deeper dives into the fascinating world of whiskey. We're committed to enhancing your podcast listening experience and are thrilled to announce that we'll now be dropping episodes every Wednesday instead of every other Wednesday starting with Season 9. That means more whiskey goodness coming your way, peoples. We'll be sharing details of what Season 9 and subsequent seasons will look like in our next episode, but while we prepare for this new season, we're taking a moment to highlight an older episode from our podcast archives. Today we're revisiting the opening episode from Season 2 featuring our good friend David Stirk. This episode is a masterclass in independent bottling. David shares insights into the world of bottlers, the history tied to the craft, how it helped start the Scotch whiskey industry. We touch on some of the intricate logistics that help to make independent bottling happen, etc., etc., etc. There's a lot in here and a lot for us all to digest. So whether you're a seasoned whiskey connoisseur or just dipping your toes into the spirit, you do not want to miss this deep dive with David. We can't wait to return with Season 9, but until then, we hope you enjoy this episode. Oh, quickly, before I forget, just a reminder, our next official episode is going to be our mailbag episode. So if you have any questions for me, for Jason, for Jess, for the three of us, about us, the whiskey industry, Single Cask Nation, you name it, please send those questions in to info@singlecasknation.com. You basically have until January 30th to get those questions in. And we look forward to receiving them. Cheers, everybody.
So Josh and I were talking.
Oh.
That
yeah.
After last January when we did our very first interview with you, we had no Scooby what we're doing. We had no Scooby what our expectations were.
Really?
Fuck you. Fuck you and the dog you rode in on.
And take two.
And we came away from the interview with you with 17 minutes. And in the very beginning of setting up the podcast, we were thinking an episode might be 30 minutes, it might be 40 minutes long. And we're now very much in the habit of doing 100-minute episodes.
Yeah.
And a 17-minute interview is a blip in a radar. And so we've been talking all through 2017. Next time we see you, we're going to sit down and have a proper conversation with you. Now, the downside is, just like this time last year, we've taken up an afternoon of your time. You're away from your wife. You're away from your two kids. You're missing dinner. And
until the dinner bit, it was all good.
We'll be having dinner with us.
I think we're all cold and hungry.
That's kind of nice.
I think there's a reason we had 17 minutes last year. And so starting now, let's go for 30 minutes.
We're going to do 30 minutes? Okay. You up for that?
You guys know I can't talk for 30 minutes.
Nah,
you.
We'll keep the jokes to a minimum.
You and I asked you about this a little bit before. And I know you listened to your episode. I know you listened to the Mark Watt episode. I don't know if you continue to listen to. I won't be upset if you don't.
Leading question. I'm a busy man. Joshua.
Is it going to be a test?
But generally what we do is we'll record a conversation and then bring in bits and bobs of that conversation and plug it into sort of a larger podcast. But the question that I had, it was something you and I discussed earlier when we were talking about caramel coloring. And you had told me a story, and we want to keep this as incredibly generic as possible so as to protect the innocent. But you had a very interesting story about your foray into the possibility of a blend, if I remember correctly, and your experience with choosing a blend or potentially choosing a blend and how caramel coloring would go into that. And I was just hoping you could share that while protecting those who need to be protected.
Part of me wants to say there are no innocents when it comes to caramel coloring. Yeah, so it's not something I have ever been exposed to really in my working life, because my time with other companies has been with companies that are very anti-caramel coloring. So predominantly Springbank and Cadenheads, who I sort of cut my teeth with and learnt my chops and all the other ways you want to say it. You know, they are the big proclaimers against caramel coloring. They make a big point that the casks are not caramel colored and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. So clearly my very little time blending with them, which would have been seconds, because they don't do much blending, you never see caramel coloring. Don't know it, didn't know it. But I did come across it later on, and it was this horrible, sticky, burnt, sugary stuff. I didn't think much of it, and that was it. Until, as you say, I was contemplating creating a blend for a local charity called Devil's Porridge, which is still a great name for a blend.
That's really good.
But it never happened. But anyway, I went to see a large blender who showed me around. Fantastic company, fantastic people. And at the end, they gave me a few samples to try. And one of them was bad. I mean, really bad. It was so bad that you would, despite trying to be as diplomatic as possible in their company, in their offices, I think my face displayed my dismay at how bad this blend was.
When you say bad, what does that mean? What was bad about it?
The nose was the only word that popped in my head there was farty. The nose was farty. It was eggy. It was
some sherry,
young,
sulfury.
Not even sulfury. Just manure-y.
Ooh.
Okay. Yeah. Not good. And young, aggressive, nose prickle galore. No malt. So no malt notes at all.
Oh, okay.
Not even the creaminess you'd expect from grain. Just bad. As if somebody had taken a very bad spirit and put it in a bottle. These were just nosing, so I didn't taste these at all. And the dismay was obviously seen by the people I was with. And a blender, chief, head, whatever this person was, said to me, "Oh, don't worry about that. The caramel will neutralize all of that."
Whoa.
Which floored me. Absolutely stuck me to the floor. And I didn't know what to say. I mean, I was something you guys have never seen, speechless.
The same that's very true. The same caramel colouring that doesn't affect flavour in the slightest.
That one.
Will now take care of farty notes.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
That's what floored me. Because you are led to believe that so little of it is used that it doesn't affect flavour. Now, I think 99% of the time that's probably the case. We're talking about something that was 3 years, 1 day, and travel time to the bottling hole that was to be sold in a market where, quite frankly, it was probably either never drunk or drunk with something that was equally as bad, be it a fizzy drink or something. Yeah. So I don't want to cast any aspersions that the industry is covering up some great conspiracy that we can make whatever we want and just override it with caramel colouring. The point of me disclosing this is because there are still people out there trying to tell you that caramel colouring does not affect flavour. Well, either that person is wrong or the person being paid a lot of money to create blends for a very large company is wrong. You pick which one you want to believe.
Well, I think it's a really interesting conversation because, episode in, episode out, Jason and I try to bring up some sort of a misconception of, people, and we talked about this in the first episode with you. People have misconceptions because they don't quite understand the industry. Sometimes it's not very clear. Sometimes there's not much transparency. But in this case, you're told by many that caramel coloring won't do anything other than add coloring. And that comes from the top down, from brand ambassadors, from I wouldn't say marketing because it's never really marketed, but that's the conversation from the brands that, it's not going to affect the flavor. So it's a misconception that's almost forced upon people.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I would like to, backtrack a little bit and say probably in 99.9% or 99% or even 95% of the cases, the amounts are so minute that it would take a trained sniffer palate dog type thing to discover it. We more mortal humans, with our terrible taste and smell probably can't. But if you are picking up a $5.99 bottle of Glen cabbage, you are more than likely going to have enough caramel coloring in there to disguise whatever it is they don't want you to taste. So there is a flip side to this. The people who are out talking about the brands that are probably correctly saying, yes, it's made no difference, are correct. Because the bargain basement, bottom of the shelf brands that tend not to have brand ambassadors going around the world buying you one of their inexpensive whiskies in a bar or something like that. So it's not, I'm not trying to shatter anybody's faith in a wonderful industry, and I'm not trying to ruffle any feathers. I just want it to be known that caramel coloring does, if it's used in the right quantity or wrong quantity, will affect flavor, definitely.
Very interesting.
And to those people who say it doesn't, I want you to go get some, and I'll send you a sample, because I've got quite a bit of it now. That's another story. That just put me in a world of hurt, didn't it? I'll send you some. I want you to taste it. I want you to put a little tiny bit and put it in your mouth. And then I want you to physically think about whether or not that could affect something. It is quite a bitter taste.
So you tasted it alone?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I had people with me. Sorry, I couldn't resist.
Just alone in a room.
Me and my caramel coloring.
But just to be very clear here, you talk about having caramel coloring here for use, but when it comes to exclusive malts, exclusive regions, exclusive blends, exclusive rums, it's not going into those products.
It definitely isn't, and my nose did not go anywhere. No, it isn't. No, that is the reason I have it is because I'm a bottler, and I bottled a very large blend that is going to the Far East, and they demanded a certain color.
Yeah.
And also, I was then able to try said blend before and said blend after, and it is different.
Wow.
So, and I do not profess to have any sort of God-given talent at picking out caramel coloring in anything at all. We've all got fairly equal palates, but because a lot of people said to me, they've done experiments and in a blind tasting and this, that, and the other. You're talking about tiny quantities, I really think you are talking about tiny quantities, and you're talking about a superficial environment where you're predisposed to look one way or the other.
Yeah.
And maybe I am too. Maybe I'm predisposed to think, there's colouring in there, it's going to taste such and such. But just, I think acknowledge it can make a change to flavour, but also acknowledge that for the vast majority of cases, do you know what? Don't worry about it. It's minute quantities.
Mm-hmm. So talk us through it for a second then. You've got the container, you stick your finger in the E150A, you pull it out and you stick that finger in your mouth. You started to
Are
suggest
we still talking about caramel coloring? What's
Every
happening
time.
here?
Do you,
Every
do you eat
time.
with that mouth?
little Jack Horner, right?
Yeah, right.
And so you
Well, look, hey, I tell you what, we're live on air. Why don't I go get some and you guys try it?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Oh my gosh. So this is David. He's taking off his lapel mic. Yeah, right.
Filling airtime. This is
This
terrific. This is
is
ideal.
fantastic.
150A straight in the mouth.
Ooh, I think I saw that movie. Volumes.
Well, we're trying to cover for you. You keep digging the hole deeper for yourself.
So this is called E150A Straight in the Mouth, Volume 7.
Jason and Josh do Thornhill.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Okay, so it is syrupy. It is
Molasses
dark as
black.
hell. Yeah,
right?
it's molasses black. It's when I thought of caramel coloring, I thought, it was just this sort of fluid that's dark. But it's
First of all, just smell it.
yeah, okay, I'm smelling it. Oh, it's bitter. It's
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Thank you.
it smells like burnt caramel. That's interesting.
The traditional way of eating this is to put it on the end of a teaspoon. Just
I have no idea where this teaspoon
here
has
we
been
go.
before this.
All right, are you Jason, you give it
okay.
a nose. What do you
I'm,
smell?
It is very acrid.
Yeah.
It's molasses ramped up to 100. It's funny, actually. It reminds me of a toffee apple that I used to get as a much younger boy around Christmas time. Mm-hmm. It's very pronounced sugar on it.
Yeah.
Okay, you taste it.
Yeah,
That was
go
me
ahead.
filling air while
that's
you
right.
tasted
Oh shit,
it.
I was supposed to taste. Okay, so
Just stick the whole thing in your mouth.
oh shit. Oh. It's bitter as all hell. Oh my gosh. It's sharp, it's bitter.
Oh, yeah, that's horrible.
There's almost like a gasoline-y, kerosene kind of thing.
Industrial,
Yeah.
oily,
Oh,
burnt petroleum.
fucking hell. And they put this in whiskey? Jesus Christ.
You can see why a little goes a long way, though.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, again, if you're using it specifically for color, this is black as night.
I'm surprised how acrid it is.
And just so they know, how much did you taste? I mean, what did you do? Put a few,
A drop's worth?
a hundredth of a gram?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
We're not talking that you just swallowed a teaspoon.
No. So what David did was he took the end, or basically, the handle of a spoon, dipped it into the little jar that has the caramel coloring in it, and just the tip of it. So you
Just
played
the
that
tip?
little game, just the tip. And I'm going to give it another taste here.
It is interesting, though. I can't stop going back for just a little more. It's horrible.
It's
And
like
yet,
burnt, wet cardboard. Oh,
but
it's
you get the
awful.
woodiness from it. You could see the way in which this
Wood.
cask influence.
You can see how that would neutralize.
Oh, yeah.
But I can also see how enough used could really affect the whiskey itself.
Yep.
Oh.
I really appreciate that taste of it.
Yeah. Look at that.
It's
the
much
first.
darker than ever imagined. I'm trying to clean it off the handle of the spoon, and it's not easy to do that.
Oh, are you?
You should try using it as a coloring agent. We have to put it into hot water and let it dissolve, and then add it to the whiskey. And it's,
Oh, okay. So you don't just add the straight
No.
syrup.
No, it's
Okay. And is there a ratio? Is it X number of drops to X number of liters, sort of a thing, or
well,
is
it
it?
very much depends on color. How
If you
dark
want
do you want
lock
it?
do or not.
Yeah.
I said nothing.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thank you for that experience. So moving away from caramel colouring, you've been in the whiskey industry now for a dozen years, 13 years?
We're 1 year away from 20.
So as creative whiskey company.
Oh, sorry, 13.
Okay.
A baker's dozen.
But you personally, 2 decades.
Yeah.
Closing in on 2 decades. One of the things I feel like we always talk about when we see each other is where the industry's going. Here we are, industry podcast, 1 year removed from our first interview with you. What do you see today in the whiskey industry? What do you think is coming in the next year, next 5 years? What do you anticipate?
It's a good question, and I'd love to hear back, because I think you asked me 1 year ago, where did I see my company in the next, whatever it was. I'd love to listen. I need to go back to the podcast and see what I said. Hopefully I said sitting on the other side of the room, because I am. The obvious answer to that is we are about to have the second, third, fourth largest deluge of brand new distilleries open their warehouses in the 400-year history of the industry. So, after the great booms of the 1820s, the 1880s, 1890s, possibly the 1960s, this is one of the biggest boom periods the industry's ever seen, and by far the most profitable period the industry has ever seen. And for that, I don't just necessarily mean the money the industry makes. I mean the impact it makes on the lives of the people around it. And that's probably one of the best things that's ever happened. So for the future, we've got... let's put it this way. You've got a whiskey shop, and currently you're a good shop. You've got 200-300 malts. Well, you're about to have 20, 30, 40, 50 new distilleries all trying to get shelf space in your shop, coupled with the continual barrage of things like my company does and other companies, the exploration of existing companies, of distilleries that have been bought out, the new malts from all the distilleries. So we're going to have quite a swamped malt market. Is the growing demand for the sector going to keep up? That's going to be an interesting thing to watch. Certain markets like the US, I think some brands are going to struggle because the US is struggling now to sell what it makes, never mind what we ship over. The funny thing is, other markets where their own distillery successes have been recent has seen an absolute surge in Scotch. So Australia is a phenomenal example. Didn't have a whiskey industry until, 15 years ago. Get a few good write-ups, get a few good distilleries, a couple of bad write-ups, and then all of a sudden there's a demand for Scotch whiskey. So swings and roundabouts in certain aspects of the industry. But that's one thing's for certain. We're going to see an absolute barrage of new brands on the table.
So you were suggesting earlier when we were going around the warehouses that there are almost two tiers of whiskey connoisseurship, enjoyment, purchasing, marketing, call it what you will. And on one hand, you seem to be suggesting that we've got, it might be a name we've used previously on the podcast, but someone like a Macallan, who are known for $500 bottles, $1,500 bottles, $4,000 bottles. But and there are other brands that fit that. But then you also seem to be suggesting there are brands that maybe aren't as well known that will be able to continue to sell at a good price with good product to people who know their whiskies. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit, on how you see that kind of two-tier connoisseurship?
The two-tiered nature, certainly in pricing, has come around because of a lack of certain types of whiskey. So whilst we will see a deluge of brand new malts come on the market, you're going to see less and less older expressions of everything. That is just simple physics or mathematics or whatever you want to call it. You don't have to be a genius to work that out. It does remind me of that wonderful tour at Springbank. We went round and Jim was giving the tour, and he said, today we're bottling the 10-year-old. That's the oldest whiskey we've got. We haven't got any more 21-year-old. And a lady in the tour said, why don't you just make some more? So it's simple logic that we are running out of old whiskey, therefore prices have gone up, therefore things like Macallan, where they can put older casks into things, prices, the demand, supply, blah, blah, blah. Macallan has now just opened a phenomenally large distillery, and time will catch up with them, and they will have enough supply to come back to more, obtainable levels of pricing, shall we say, the more everyday level. So things will even out in that respect, but all the stuff will continue to rise. If you go back 10 years, the idea of spending over £100 for an old whiskey was, almost unheard of.
Yep.
I remember buying Macallan 25-year-old for £95.
Wow.
Wow. And at the time, thinking, oh my God, what could I do with that kind of money?
Yep.
That same bottle now is a couple grand, whatever it is, for 3,000-4,000.
Yep.
So, that will change, and those companies that have continually kept themselves in the affordable range will maintain that. They've ploughed their field, and I don't think there'll be much change for them with the pricing structure. If you're in the UK, tax takes up so much of it anyway that there's not much you can do. By the time you've done your basic packaging and everything, tax then adds so much more on that you can never be under a certain pricing unless you want to lose money.
But what kind of percent, just for our listeners, what kind of percentage of tax in the UK can they see on a bottle?
If you're buying a bottle at 46%, the alcohol tax, I think, is £8 something, and then we've got 20% VAT on top of that. So you're talking around £10 tax before you've even begun to buy a bottle, put a cork in it, label it, and then fill it with whiskey. And then if you've made any money, if the distributor's made any money and the retailer's made any money. So if you buy a malt at a supermarket over here for £25, you can knock off 10 of that before they've even begun.
Gotcha.
Wow.
Given what you were just saying a moment ago about whiskey history, we've seen the booms, we've seen the busts. With your finger on the pulse, do you see a bust? Do you seem to be talking in a way that you see a leveling off or a returning to base. You don't seem to be talking about seeing a bust where whiskey lovers, fanatics, connoisseurs will move on to rum or gin, vodka. You don't seem to be talking in those ways. Do you see a bust coming? Do you see this leading to closures?
Yes and no. And the entire, from what I can see, and I do not travel all the world and see all the markets, but my little understanding of it is that the world is drinking better quality of almost everything they drink. So the beer industry in the last 20 years, take the American beer industry, from being the brunt of all jokes, you know, the old Monty Python joke, I won't do it again. Yeah.
Sex in a canoe.
Yep. From being the brunt of all jokes to now being to the point where their brewers are shipped in all over the world as consultants because they make the best beer. Yeah. They have the best ingredients, blah, blah, blah. The world is drinking better quality of almost everything. And that means that the bust could come in the Scotch whisky industry and other whisky industries too are propped up by the less expensive sector of that market. You know, most of my tastings, I still tell people that about 10% or just less than 10% of all the Scotch whisky drunk in the world is malt whisky. That means that 90% is blended, and a lot of that 90% is at the more affordable level. That could be where the bust is. If new markets are not sought for those cheaper, more affordable brands, for that stock to find a way into the market, what will those companies do with it? If you are sat on 5 million litres of young grain and 2 million litres of malt, and we have another Spain, which was an enormous whiskey market and just plummeted overnight. Imagine France doing that, the biggest drinking market in the whole world. That could be a huge problem for the industry.
When did that crash happen in Spain?
The recession, 2007.
Yeah, okay.
And it was almost overnight. It really was. Spain grew and grew, and I think at one point was the biggest market in the world for consumption of Scotch whisky. Recession hit, and boom, just the bottom that. Now, other markets, funnily enough, at the time picked up some of the slack, and France has continued to do well. But the French market is coming on leaps and bounds for the higher end stuff. And if they're drinking taste change, and I'll give you an example of it. You look at the sherry industry that was propped up predominantly by the British and Dutch drinkers, and to a certain extent the American drinkers. And their demographic changed within a decade or 2 decades. And now sherry sales are...
Yep, in the very bottom of the toilet.
Yeah, you count them on an abacus rather than a computer. You know, it's...
Sadly.
If that's what happens, if your demographic changes, if your main market, if you've got all your eggs in a couple baskets and one of those baskets falls and you can't get another basket up, then that's where I can see a bust happening. What would that mean? Well, that would mean maybe a couple of grain distillery closures. It would mean some of the fillers of malt distilleries closing. But we're talking about big companies, and they have much cleverer minds than me looking into all of this. And I'm sure they've already done their risk analysis and things like that. So the industry's never been in better health. It's never had a more careful view on the future. And I'm talking here about the big companies. I'm not talking about the plethora of new distilleries that have started up.
Yeah.
Many of them, I think, have been started on the back of the sale of Buricladi, that enormous return of the investment that,
Sure.
you know, in 11 years, whatever it was. So yeah, you've got that possible bust, and of course we know what the boom is. The boom is all these malt whiskies coming out. Almost every single distillery now that makes malt whiskey has a malt brand. There is possibly never been a time in history where that's ever happened. There isn't at the moment, because there's still a couple. But, you know, we're closest to it now than we've ever been. And the desire to try them all is what's driving it.
Which is the perfect lead-in to a question I was going to ask you.
I'm all about the segue.
Let's see if it's the same question I had. You go ahead.
So a few episodes after we spoke with you, we spoke with Mark Watt.
Never heard of him.
And former colleague, and as we discussed with you in terms of independent bottling, then we had the Cadenheads conversation with Mark. He was kind of pointing out that at the independent bottling level, single casks, natural cask strength, there's not really a lot of loyalty there, where somebody who's buying from independent bottlers is maybe chasing a particular distillery or a few distilleries. I get the sense with you in observing Creative Whiskey Company that you do have a following. You do seem to have a loyal group of fanatics in numerous countries across the world who are following your bottlings. So my question to you is, how much do you see the independent bottling fan is happy to buy from you, buy from Signatory, buy from Cadenheads, buy from us, Single Cask Nation, and how much you think they're willing to dive right in, focused on David Stirk's latest release?
It's funny, because if you'd said to me, who do I think has the most loyal following, I would say Cadenheads. And Mark has done more than probably anybody else in their history to achieve that.
Yeah, agreed.
And Mark, if you're listening, I want another big fat check for that.
There's a crisp £5 note.
Oh,
in the mail
£5.
for you.
Jeez.
Yeah.
How'd you haggle him up to that? No, it's a funny one, and it's hard to sort of ever quantify in any way, because I don't sadly get enough time on the ground floor, if you will, to talk to people who buy my whiskies, to find out what their purchase process is. Do I believe that I have a cult following? No, not at all.
Really?
Yeah, even with my inflated ego.
I'll disagree with that.
And Facebook page that seems to have people falling over themselves.
I occasionally get from some people, I really trust your palate, which is phenomenally gratifying. But then I will always tell people, look, you know, it's what you like, it's not what I like. If you buy a whiskey of mine, you don't like it, that's just the way it goes. If you really don't like it, you let me know, and I'll try my best to swap it. But cult following, do you know, it's funny. I want to touch on that a little bit, because there is this idea, as there are with distilleries, that there were halcyon days, and in those there were master cask selectors, for want of a better phrase. And for instance, take Samaroli, okay?
Yep.
A name I came across 20 years ago, of course, in my Cadenhead days, and by that point we weren't supplying them anymore. All the supply to him was pre my time. But here was a name, and I never got to meet him either, sadly. I wish I could have. But here was a name of somebody that was bandied about as being just superior in their knowledge, in their cask selection, in their ability, whatever it was. Now, I will not disparage that. I'm not going to go against that. But let me put it this way too. Whoever says that, when Samaroli was buying those casks of Springbank and Ardbeg and Lafroig, he had no competition. And more, he had open warehouses.
Yeah.
He had guys ringing him up, asking him if he would like to buy another cask of 1967 Ardbeg. Now, I don't believe for one second that Samaroli, and even Andrew Simonton in his early days, when he also was very, what's the word I want? Lucky, I guess. Now, I don't want to say anything. He's not lucky. He's one of the hardest working people in the industry, and he's where he is now because of that. But he was very lucky because at the time, there was all this whiskey to sell. But the reverse of that is they didn't just fly off the shelves, these things. They were a hard sell at the time. I mean, geez, I remember working for Cadenheads when I couldn't sell Dallas Dew. Imagine that.
Well, they shut it for a reason, right?
Yeah, you couldn't. We had Glenolbin returned from the US because the importer couldn't sell it. I mean, this is the difference.
Yeah.
So there is this idea now that we have lost some ability to pick casks, and that there was a time when there were great cask selectors. There weren't. There was a time when there were greater casks available. There was a wider variety. There were stunning sherry casks. There were all these other things that were on offer, and you could pick them. You could go in and say yay or nay to two different 1975 Lafroigs because the warehouse was open and the tills were ringing. So this idea of a cult following, I think, no, I don't see that personally. As a buyer myself, I am persuaded most by the distillery name, by what the retailer tells me, mostly by the retailer. I will often go into a shop. One of my favorites still is Good Spirits. I'll go in. If it's Roddy or Matthew, I'll say, recommend me something. Yeah. You know me. You know what I like. Yeah. And I don't care if it's Gordon MacPhail. I don't care if it's distillery bottling. I don't care if they bottle it themselves. If it's good, I can afford it. And quite often, because I'm lucky, they'll let me try it. I'll buy it. So there's no... I don't see any loyalty. The reason that companies like myself and Cadenheads and everybody else does the festivals is to take what we have on offer and hope that you get some of what we do. Yeah,
sure.
Get an idea.
Sure.
But I certainly don't feel like if I have a cult following, fantastic. Hello to all of you, all three of you. Hope you're listening.
No, I think you definitely do. I think the blends that you're putting out, I think the exclusive blends with a 1980s and a 1990s and one of the 97s that we tasted today, I think those absolutely have a cult following that is incredibly loyal to what's going into the bottle. So kudos to you on those.
Well, I can take no credit for those because I didn't blend them. But
but it's selection, right? It's still the independent bottler making
I saved them from anonymity.
So just quickly back to the old days with Samaroli having access to these, amazing casks, and everybody's warehouses were open, in Cadenheads and all these. That, from an independent bottler's perspective of access to whiskey, sounds like a heyday of independent bottling. By extension, saying that that's all gone away, it sort of paints this slightly dire picture of the situation that some independent bottlers may be in today. What do you see as a hopeful spot for independent bottlers? I mean, obviously it's changed, but what gives you hope as an independent bottler to keep going?
David Stirk, you're our only hope.
Help me, David Stirk. He once helped my uncle. Told you, I do the whole movie. No, that is a brilliant question. They were heady days. It was, if I could do a share and turn back time.
If I can turn.
Yeah.
And now all I can do is imagine David Stirk in Cher's outfit.
Oh, my God.
Oh, stop. Now I'm imagining me in the outfit. Oh. My brother worked on that boat. I'm cleaning it, I think, for weeks. Anyway.
If I could find a way.
This is all getting cut.
This is exactly what's staying in.
This is the only part that's staying.
What gives me hope? To be honest, what gives me hope is every single time I walk into a Cadenhead shop, I leave with a bottle. Every time I walk in a Good Spirits company, I leave with a bottle. Every time I go on a tour of anywhere, I leave with bottles. I have a lot of bottles now. Too much to drink. I'll work through though. When people come visit me, most of the time, they'll leave with a bottle. If I'm doing a tasting, 9 out of 10 people leave with a bottle. So we can't rest on what history gave us, because you only get to go to things like the Old and Rare or Limburg a couple times a year to try them.
Yeah.
And then you go home and you find divorce papers because you've just spent the family savings on trying these whiskies. If you think that whiskey never ever got better than the 60s and 70s, you need deep pockets. And you're probably right. That probably was the ultimate period for malt whiskey. But they will run out, and you will run out buying them, and you will run out of money buying them unless you're Bill Gates. Last I heard, he doesn't drink that kind of stuff, thank God. But there is something else. Somebody's doing something else. Gordon MacPhail are releasing a 9-year-old Bunnahabhain that will knock your socks off. Cadenhead's digging things out of the warehouse I think they forgot they had, and it's knocking your socks off, and it's affordable, and it's brilliant. Signatory is still somehow finding casks that are just outstanding and stellar. Every bottler really has something that they do every now and again that for you at that moment is going to, just send you into a reel of ecstasy. I mean, I remember going to this just mad tasting at malt stock with this weird guy from America, and he had this unbelievable Milton Duff 9-year-old. And as much as I wanted to hate the tasting and hate the guy, just that whiskey, I can still taste it. 9 years old.
Wow.
Yeah.
I had heard from many people at Maltstock that he was actually a favorite. They really liked him.
Well,
How is your Dutch?
That didn't mean what you thought it meant.
Oh,
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, okay.
No,
Did you take the canvas to Maltstock?
Did I take the canvas?
I remember the Milton Duff.
No, Milton Duff,
Lefroy.
Inchmarin, Lefroy,
Okay.
and Canvas.
And the rum.
No. Okay, so not Canvas, the rum,
Yeah.
and then
And that rum was outstanding too.
the Westland and the English
the
Whiskey
Westland,
Company.
yes.
It was a good time.
So that's what gives me hope. Doesn't matter who the company is. I remember I had a Klein from Weems not so long ago. Oh, outstanding. I had a Garnheath from Vintage Malt Whiskey Company. Oh, tell you what, I actually tried to. I tried to, beg and borrow a cask of Garnheath from
Not a lot of Garnheath
Andrew,
out there.
but he'd run out. So if you see Garnheath, get it. Phenomenal. As grain whiskey.
So given that Josh and I are in business together, and he's the optimist, and I'm the pessimist.
I'm the realist, and you are the pessimist.
I remain the pessimist.
Yeah.
One of the things I've always advocated for Scottish independent bottling is that you could have a distillery name front and centre, and it was always the peek behind the curtain. And we've always contrasted that with American independent bottling, which was don't use the name. Tell any story you want, just don't use our distillery name. As we have discussed and seen and observed and lamented, some Scottish distilleries are moving in the direction of do not use our name on this. I absolutely lament that development. Where do you stand on that, sir?
Yeah, it's funny. I've never thought about it with the American industry versus the the Scotch industry, but you've got massive brands in America that were non-existent. I'm not going to name any, but you did. And then some built the distillery later and tried to claim. And
Let me just interject really quickly here. I think we need to be clear about the verbiage, because an independent bottler suggests a bottling company that highlights, the distilleries, that classic Scottish tradition, where the American tradition,
brand owner.
It's what's called a non-distiller producer.
Yeah, NDPs.
NDP, like High West, like Smooth Ambler, like Templeton. You can keep on naming brands out there, but they're non-distiller producers, and so I want to be very clear that
The good thing is, though,
there's a
Joshua,
good-
you're in Scotland, so they're independent bottlers. Over here, we don't have NDPs. We have independent bottlers. You either are or you aren't. If you've got a distillery, you're a proprietary brand.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're an independent bottler.
Yeah, we discussed just an episode or two ago about someone like Compass Box fitting the NDP category.
because they're creating a brand out of blending, from many different distillers. They've got their oak cross, they have their spice tree, so on and so forth. And yes, they're independently bottling whiskeys from many distilleries, but they're creating products that are, standalone, always available. They're not distilling it, they're producing it, hence NDP. And so I think Compass Box is a good example of what High West does when they have, say, their double rye, where they're marrying 2-year-old rye with 16-year-old rye, and then sometimes, extra maturing it in various casks and so on. So
I wonder what John would prefer to be called.
yeah, good question.
When you interview him, ask him.
We will one of these days.
If you can,
So,
if you can pin him down. Good luck.
I'm sorry to sort of put
That's all right.
a speed bump into that.
Well, I suppose
question there.
you need to clarify. I think there
Yeah.
is a big difference. You need to clarify. The Van Winkle family were and are, I think, technically independent bottlers. They weren't distilling their own stuff, were they?
No, but they're contracting out a distillery to say, this is our mash bill preference, here's our cask preference, and I don't even know what you'd call them, because they're not even really producing it. I mean, they're having someone distill it, mature it.
Yeah. But if there are specification demands, then you're looking at a contract distiller.
Yeah.
Which we tend not to have over here, funnily enough. You do swaps and trades and blending portfolios, but...
We just had it with Tipperary, the new Stuart and Jen Nickerson enterprise, with some contract distilling going on in there. To give an idea.
Yeah, it's a lot
of what to
more. There's a lot
expect.
more of that. What do you say? NDP
Yeah.
in Ireland at the moment,
Yeah.
and that's simply because they don't have the portfolio of distilleries to do any independent bottlings like we do. How many are working in Scotland at the moment? 90 something or other.
Yeah.
In Ireland there were 3,
Yeah.
and one was owned by a company that didn't let anything out. The other one was owned by a company that didn't let anything out. So there was one really.
Yep.
It was tough. The confusion I think there is that some have tried to sort of almost pass off as their own, where there's been a little bit of trouble.
Well, there's some American brands that got into
Yes.
trouble as well, right?
Didn't Templeton get sued?
I didn't want to put that name out there, but you did it for me, so thank you.
You can cut it.
No. So I derailed your question. Can you...
Yeah, just what do we lose when
Oh, the names,
when
yes.
Scottish
Yeah, when-
independent bottlers cannot put a name on a label?
I'm torn on this one. I'm torn because I am a name hunter. If I go into a shop and I see an Adelphi Klein leash, my wallet is already half open.
Yeah.
I just sent Joshua one of those for Hanukkah.
Thank you again.
Just Joshua. Is that all? The only one you love, eh?
How was your Hanukkah?
It was Klein leashless, lacking in a good bottle of Klein leash. So yeah, in one respect, I am a distillery hunter. The flip side of that, and I've said this for quite a long time, is anybody can buy a cask of Macallan, for want of a better name, and sell it. Anybody. I don't care who you are. The recent auctions of casks to the Far East have demonstrated that suddenly it's nothing to do with the quality inside, it's to do with the cachet and name.
Yep.
So if I was privy to a warehouse filled with 1,000 casks of Macallan, I'm going to retire in a year and I'm going to be very wealthy, and I've not done anything. And that's because Macallan built up a phenomenal reputation around the world of quality and excellence. And I'm simply trading off the back of it. And as an independent bottler, I'm very wary of just simply being able to churn out stuff that sells because of the name. It's unfair, it's slightly dishonest, and it really isn't the game that we're in this for. I think independent bottlers exist to show whiskey drinkers what is possible from as many different distilleries as possible. And if there was a sudden amnesty tomorrow and all distillers got together and said, right, we're going to open our doors to independent bottlers, but we are going to create an environment where names cannot be used. So we'll have a mandate or whatever that says, if you use our distillery name, we'll come down here. As an industry, we'll come down here on it like a ton of bricks. But you will get access to pretty much whatever you want within reason. I think I'd have to welcome that with open arms. Because we should be viewed on what we stick in a bottle. And are you a good independent bottler because you've got 10 Ardbegs in the warehouse? Or are you a good independent bottler because you've bottled, I don't want to pick on anybody here, but an Inchgauer, for want of a better name.
Yeah.
When I worked for Cadenheads, I remember bottling an 88 Inchgauer that was stunning. Still remember it to this day. And it sold so fast in the days when I struggled to sell a Dallas 2. And that gave me great, satisfaction.
Yeah.
I'd always take it to the tasting. Because most people had never had one before. To me, that's the job of an independent bottler. Now, if you take all the names away and we simply have to start doing like an SMWS-style description of each, do you know what? I'd say bring it on. I'd love it.
But I think the issue for me is that none of it remains anonymous. So whether you put out a Burnside or a Wardhead or a 1 point something or a 14 point something or an Orkney, there's always a connection to who the distillery is. And it strikes me as something of a subterfuge that's completely unnecessary. What I do like about your answer is you're deep into this as an independent bottler. And I still feel, and Joshua and I are 6-7 years into this, I still look at a lot of this as a consumer who's in the privileged position of bottling casks. And as a consumer, whether it's Lafroig or Williamson or Isla, call it what you will, you know that it's Lafroig in the bottle. And that's worth pursuing and that's worth knowing more about. As a consumer, I'd love to see all the Lafroigs named. And I can say that independent bottler chose a good cask of Lafroig, as opposed to your position, which is more, whether we put Lafroig's name on it or not, we call it anything under the sun, was it good whiskey in the bottle? And I'm quite partial to that as well. But I want to have faith in the distillery name first and foremost, and I can judge the independent bottler on the back of that.
The problem with that is you are not judging the distillery, and I'll explain what I mean. If you are a big enough distillery, you are selling your distillate or trading your distillate. I don't know if they barter or sell. I don't know how it works. I've never done it. But let's just assume you're selling your distillate to a third party for their blend. So let's take Lafroig, for instance. At the beginning of each production year, you might have a contract or a deal or trade with another company that owns a blend. Let's call it Glen Brazil Nut for now. And when Glen Brazil Nut needs 100,000 litres of Lafroig every single year.
Yep.
So it gets distilled, same way as all Lafroig, let's assume, same way as all Lafroig does, put into a tanker, tankered across to Glen Brazil Nut's warehouses. I should have chosen a better name. I don't know where that came from. Anyway.
I was looking around here to see what
I can't call it BR now.
influence was.
That's too close to another company. So anyway, they're at the warehouses, and it just so happens that warehouse has very poor casks, that production run. Really bad wood.
Yep.
They don't care. They've got this stuff. They've got to put it in. So in it goes.
Yep.
Lefroy in that bad wood. 10 years go down the line. Somebody goes, what happened to that Lefroy we put in the bad wood? Oh, let's go try it. Oh, that is awful.
Yep.
Let's get rid of it. Out it goes into the marketplace. 20 different independent bottlers swoop round it, pick it all up, bottle the whole lot.
Yep.
And out floods a batch load of substandard Lefroy,
Yep.
of which the original distillery now has no control over.
Yep.
And that is the problem they have.
Yep.
This stuff is not... If independent bottlers do not rock up at Lefroy and buy a cask of Lefroy, and the distillery manager comes out and says, this is a cracker. Stick this in a bottle, you'll make us a name.
Yep.
They don't need to. They're massive. They're Lefroy.
Yep.
This is all third-party stuff. And if I owned Lefroy, I'd be annoyed. I'd be annoyed at all of the crap casks that had been bottled. Now, this is in my little analogy. I'm not saying they exist. I'm not saying they're out there. No. That's why I say there should be, or there could be, or there might be, or it could be a good idea if there was an amnesty. If suddenly you could bottle this Isla, couldn't call it what it was, and if you're a bottler that just gets a cask and shoves it in the bottle, you're going to get found out. So that's the flip side of it.
Correct. No, and I think you're spot on. One of the ways we've always sold it is independent bottlers allow you to have a peek behind the curtain, and there are some distilleries where, for whatever reason, independent bottlers have been putting out better examples of that distillery than the distillery itself, which is the exact...
Name them. Name them.
Which is the exact flip of the version you're giving, and I still agree with the version you're giving.
Yes, there's no easy answer to this. You've also got to bear in mind that the independent world of whiskey is 200 years old.
Correct.
Yeah.
No independent bottlers, no Johnny Walker, no Chivas Regal.
Yep.
They were independent bottlers. They started as traders who bought in barrels and then created their own brand from blending other people's whiskey together.
Yep.
So if you are the owner of Johnny Walker and you take a dim view of independent bottlers, you don't know your history.
Yep.
And I do find it quite funny when independent bottlers buy a distillery, they suddenly stop all casks of that said distillery going into the market. Would I do the same? I probably would. So I won't be too hypocritical about it, but it is funny when that happens. But it's an old industry. It's been around for a long time. Personally, and for as long as I've been in the industry, I absolutely 100% believe independent bottlers add an incredible amount to the category, and in some cases to the development of brands.
100%.
And I think some companies do themselves a disservice by treating independent bottlers as some sort of scavenger, parasite who see us as living off scraps, as if somehow we don't care.
Yep.
I think in some instances we care more about it than the people making it, because sometimes you're working in a factory, you clock in and clock out. Sometimes, occasionally.
Yeah. Well, I think it was Mark Watt's line, and I don't know if it made it into the episode or not, which
He's going to now.
Right. In times of boom, independent bottlers are the industry's worst enemy. And in times of bust, independent bottlers are the industry's best friend. And that's a very interesting way.
We weren't frowned upon when that whiskey lock was...
Right.
Meanwhile, at the Legion of Doom.
Not now!
Okay.
We want another misconception?
For this episode.
Can I say
I think we start... Okay.
The misconceptions, these guys know what they're doing?
Yeah, so we are a year into our initial conversation, and I think your initial misconception was age equals quality. I think that's what it was. I mean,
it sounds like something I'd say.
We're going with the fault of memory here, but
it's not my chat up line now, of course.
So what is in the past year? What have you heard that has gotten you to say, where on God's green earth did you hear that?
Well, other than the caramel colouring, there's been loads, but nothing springs to mind. What I have been harping on about in my tastings a lot And I think, did you go to my tasting at Maltstock?
At Maltstock, yeah.
So I said this at Maltstock too, and Mark ranted at me for taking half of his campfire speech away. I personally believe there is a misconception that there are people with a God-given or natural talent at telling them what they are going to want to drink. And it happens in most hedonistic industries. Wine is even worse. America suffered for years with the Parkerization of the wine industry. Yeah. But there are people who look to certain people for guidance on what they're going to like. And I didn't do it when I started. And most people I work around and enjoy company of didn't do it. Trust me, there is nobody better at telling you what you're going to like than you. I don't care how many books, tasting notes you're going to read, how many magazines, how many people you follow on whatever, until you go out and try enough. Yeah. And that's the key. Don't have 3 whiskeys and say you hate whiskey. Don't have 3 bourbons and say you hate bourbon. And don't sit there with a wheated bourbon and tell me you don't like grain whiskey from Scotland, because that really gets my goat. You're going to tell you what you like. And it's a voyage of discovery. Go to tastings. Go talk to retailers. Go anywhere where they're pouring and you can try. Sign up to clubs. Join things. Go to festivals. Go to Isla. Definitely. All those people, I don't like Isla whiskey. Go to Isla. You'll leave liking it. Trust me.
Oh, yeah.
You'll like the place. Go to Kentucky. I've never been, but I have to go one day. Go to Westland. Go anywhere. Go try these things. Go smell them in their environment. Go taste them at the source. And then you can decide. And you'll also be better informed to read other people's taste notes and get things from them and things like that.
So that's what I was going to say is when I started my journey into whiskey and trying to grasp the flavors and what I liked and what I didn't like, I read what was available at the time. You had Serge at Whiskey Fun, you had Sam Simmons with Dr. Whiskey. I think Reuben was just coming online sometime.
Whiskey Notes.
Same time as us,
Right? And I found myself, I said, well, I like whiskey. So I tried a few and said, oh, I like this. I want to go down that rabbit hole. And I would try more and more, and then I would compare what I was tasting to what people were writing. So sort of taking it from the other end of what you're saying, don't just read something and say, oh, they've got really good notes. They gave it a score of 93, and this is going to be good. If Serge at Whiskey Fun gives a whiskey 89 points and says this is fantastic, it could be a terrible whiskey to me, or I could like it even more than his 89 points. I think you're right. You want to go to what do you like and then see what other people think about it. And these people like Serge who have been doing it for quite a long time, maybe you'll like what they like. If you find your palate lines up with his or with Reuben's or with whoever, then you can sort of follow their lead. And I take that also with independent bottlers where if I really liked this exclusive malts and that one and then this one, I say, okay, my tastes align with David Stirk's. That makes sense.
You can join the cult.
Right? Wait, I'm sorry, say that again?
You can join the cult.
Yes, I can join the cult.
4 members now.
So I think it's sort of that similar approach, but you have to trust your own palate.
Yeah.
You need
I should point out there's absolutely nothing. I read Serge's blog all the time. I love his writing. I think he's a very funny guy. I like him a lot. He's very, very good for the industry. And he always caveats everything with, this is my opinion. If you don't agree with it, I don't care. It's my opinion. Don't take it as gospel. And they're great. They're great fun. Read them. But by all means, don't look to these things. If some Wally wants to give a whiskey of the year title, it means nothing. It means zero. It means absolutely. It means he has tried a lot of whiskies, but not all of them, and he wants to make. He wants to sell something, or he wants to make himself appear. Whatever. There is no such thing as whiskey of the year. There is no such thing as most beautiful woman in the world. it doesn't exist.
Tell that to the Japanese whiskey boom.
But it's amazing what then correlates to sales.
Well, and this is why I fight against it.
Yeah.
This is why I fight against it, because it shouldn't. It shouldn't.
As soon as your Irish whiskey in the US scored, 95, 96 points with Whiskey Advocate, places that were humming and hawing over bringing in an order couldn't bring in enough cases, and there was not enough to go around.
It's such a shame for me personally. I think it is. I suppose people need something. There are so many whiskies. They need something to differentiate.
Yeah, like it or lump it, in the U.S. market, the consumer looks for awards, and they really pay attention to it. They need to know that someone respected has given it the stamp of approval, which I think gets back to something you had posted on Facebook a little while back, where people wanted to know the tasting notes, like of your whiskeys, like what's going on with this, and you saw it as a very American
10 to 1
thing, right?
10 to 1, yeah.
And
I think it's more that I have to change than the industry, because it is so it's everywhere, especially in the US.
Oh, yeah.
I think Europeans tend to be a lot more suspicious and cynical of certainly awards. We want to know, well, what else was in the award? Why, did everybody get a gold award? How much did you pay for the gold award? Did you get a double gold? Well, that means nothing. We're the Europeans are much more that inclined, and I'm like, I am going to have to fight it for the US market, because it's too evident that it's too important.
It's incredibly important.
And the problem I have is I've built my business up on not sending samples out, not entering competitions, not trying to appear superior in any way, shape or form. I've been trying to. Whether my ego gets in the way, I have no idea. But because I don't believe in them, I've never subscribed to them.
But I also think, and we've talked about this internally, where Americans tend to go to a whiskey festival and drink what they've got in their cabinet. And I get the feeling that when Europeans...
It's crazy, right?
I get the feeling that when Europeans go to whiskey festivals, it's to try new stuff. Oh, here's Creative Whiskey Company. I haven't had them before. I wonder what I think. Whereas in an American show, there's a chance somebody goes out and goes, I'm a Creative Whiskey Company. I've never had that before. Here's Lagavulin 16 over here. I've got that at home. I'll go drink some Lagavulin 16.
I will disagree with that at least when it comes to the Jubilee.
Oh,
because
I wasn't naming names.
Yeah, okay. One of the things that we hear more often than not is, what an eclectic pour list you have. I tried whiskeys I'd never even heard of before, and that's what we go for. And so I don't know if we're bringing in a different clientele. I don't know what the story is, but that is what we hear.
I cannot imagine going to a festival and drinking something I have
That's
a
the
bottle of
last thing I want to do.
I remember going to a festival and a stand, no names mentioned, but we talked about it a lot earlier. They're from Isla. They had 3 bottles in their stand, and I literally had every single one of them open at home.
Yeah.
And behind them, they had one I had not tried, but they were not opening it that festival. I said, well, why am I here? This is many, many years ago. Why am I here? Those I can get in the supermarkets. Why bring those to a festival?
Why did they have one they weren't opening?
To show their range. They had 4 at the time. 4 whiskies. No, it was expensive, that one. That was, at least £35 a bottle or something. Right. Yeah. But just, the times changed from that. But I cannot imagine going to a festival, unless it's something that you had 10 years ago and you want to see if it, then yeah, fair enough. But to me, festivals, Seattle's a good example. The Jubilee in Seattle. My stand was opposite Copperworks. Mm-hmm. Oh, fantastic. What a phenomenal whiskey that was. So unique. I tried it 3 or 4 times. Brilliant. And something I'd never had before. Yeah. That's why I go to a festival.
Yeah.
Really, I should have been working on the stand. But,
You've got people for that now. You're successful.
I didn't actually. I chose my time carefully. Yeah. But if I can give one piece of advice to anybody who listens to this, especially you young men, if you go to a festival and there are 50, 60, 100 whiskies, 200 whiskies, if your intention is to go straight to the Ardbeg or Lafroig stand, you're an idiot. Plain and simple, you are an idiot. The rest of the evening is going to taste of Ardbeg or Lafroig.
You need to
Give
end
yourself
it,
at least half an hour. Go try something else. Go pick out a brand you've never heard of. Give it a go. Because quite frankly, even if you don't like it, the Ardbeg or Lafroig will wash the glass out for you and you'll still taste the Ardbeg or Lafroig.
They'll still be
But
there
for
for
those
you.
guys that race straight in and go straight to the Ardbeg stand, not to put anything against Ardbeg, which is great whiskey, you know, it's like going to a fine restaurant and ordering the ice cream first. You are an idiot. Don't do it. Anyway, there we are.
Well, cheers.
On that bombshell.
Yeah, on that bombshell.
We'll get out of here on that.